Ever since I picked up this phone, the native iPhone camera app has been my go-to for all my video recording. It's fast, clean, reliable, and just the kind of tool that feels invisible when you're using it. But recently, I started playing around with the Blackmagic Camera app, the same app used to film the iPhone keynote and even blockbuster films like 28 Years Later. And that's when I discovered something really interesting. When I framed up the same shot, the field of view in the Blackmagic app was somehow significantly wider than in the native app, even though I was using the exact same 24mm main lens. Now obviously, capturing a wider field of view with less crop-in is generally a desirable thing, because it means we're using more of the sensor's resolution and keeping more detail. So it made me wonder what is going on here, because I don't want to lose image quality unless there's a really good reason for it. And it's that question that sent me down my next rabbit hole. In this video, I'll show you exactly what I found and why, when you're shooting with a gimbal or a tripod, you might actually want to ditch the iPhone's native camera app altogether. The difference between the amount of crop-in between the two apps all comes down to one thing: stabilization. Recent iPhones like this iPhone 15 Pro Max and the newer 16 and 17 series have incredibly complex stabilization pipelines, but fundamentally they combine two types of stabilization. First, we have sensor shift optical image stabilization, a physical mechanism that literally moves the camera sensor to counteract shaking. And because it's happening at the hardware level, it doesn't cost you any image quality at all. Then, layered on top of that, you have electronic image stabilization, or EIS. This is a software trick which involves using gyro data to shift and crop the frame to further smooth out the footage. So my theory was this: the native camera app must be using a much stronger level of digital stabilization than the Blackmagic app. And sure enough, that's exactly what's happening. There's actually a setting for the iPhone camera app from the 14 series onward called Enhanced Image Stabilization, and by default it's turned on. Let's turn it off. And just like that, the frame widens instantly. And in most situations, you won't actually notice any loss in stability. For example, in this walking comparison, I couldn't see much improvement as a result of having the Enhanced Stabilization setting enabled. You're basically just giving up some field of view for no real gain. So with that setting now turned off, I figured the amount of crop-in on the native camera app would now match what I was getting on the Blackmagic Camera app. Well, this is where it gets even more interesting. Even with that setting turned off, the native app is still cropping in more than the Blackmagic app on its standard level of stabilization. It turns out the native app's base level of stabilization is more aggressive and equivalent to the extreme setting on the Blackmagic app. So why does this matter? Let's talk about handheld shooting first. If you're just walking around and recording, the native app's stabilization is actually helpful. Footage taken on the Blackmagic Camera app's standard stabilization mode is definitely a bit shakier than footage from the native app. But once you put the phone on a gimbal, that extra electronic stabilization that's baked into the native camera app becomes pointless. The gimbal is already doing a lot of heavy lifting, so the extra crop-in just affects image quality for very little to no benefit. Here's some gimbal footage taken with the native camera app, and here's some gimbal footage taken on the Blackmagic app with the standard level of stabilization selected. As you can see, when you're using a gimbal, you don't really benefit from the extra digital stabilization that the native app forces upon you. Now, what about other third-party camera apps, like the DJI Mimo app for example, which is what you might use if you have a DJI Osmo mobile gimbal? Well, all third-party apps have to rely on Apple's Camera API, which provides 5 levels of stabilization: off, standard, cinematic, cinematic extended, and cinematic extended enhanced. The Blackmagic Camera app exposes these options to the user, while from my testing, the DJI Mimo app seems to utilize the API's standard level of stabilization, which honestly is the best balance of smoothness and detail for gimbal shots. In case you're wondering, yes, I also tried using the gimbal with the Blackmagic app and stabilization set to off. As you can see, things become a bit too shaky, so at least with these kind of walking shots taken with a gimbal, the standard setting really does hit the sweet spot. So here's the bottom line, the native camera app is like an overprotective parent. It's trying to keep you safe and smooth at all costs, and for quick, casual handheld shots, that's very helpful. But if you're using a gimbal or a tripod, the extra digital stabilization isn't very helpful. It's just cropping into your image and throwing away resolution for no real reason. And since Apple doesn't give you any stabilization options inside the native app apart from action mode, which just crops in even more, the only way to get the wider, cleaner image is to use a third-party camera app. This could be your gimbal's companion app, which usually uses the less aggressive standard level of stabilization from the API, or the Blackmagic Camera app, which lets you pick the exact level of stabilization yourself. To wrap things up, here's a quick cheat sheet that shows the relative amounts of electronic image stabilization applied across different camera app combinations. Just keep in mind, this was created purely by comparing crop factors, so if there were to be any algorithmic differences between the native app stabilization and the stabilization methods provided by the API, these wouldn't be reflected here.